Hi, thanks for joining the training today. We are immigration attorneys at the Mdivani Corporate Immigration Law Firm. Our role here today is to give you a little update on what's happening during COVID-19. My name's Danielle Atchison. As I mentioned, I'm a business immigration attorney at the firm. I have been doing this for almost 7 years, so hopefully we can share our experience here and deep expertise on corporate immigration issues, including I-9s, to help you along during this very, very unusual time. Also with us today, we have Leyla McMullen on the phone. Leyla, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Danielle. Hi, I'm Leyla McMullen. I'm also a business immigration attorney with the Mdivani Corporate Immigration Law Firm. I do a lot of the compliance work for our firm. I started doing this in 2004, so it's been a little bit, and I've gotten to see how compliance operates throughout the years.
Perfect. So we'll use her expertise on I-9 audits and then internal audits and ICE audits as well. So we'll get going here. Disclaimer, of course, we're attorneys giving you training. It's just that. It's only training. This does not create an attorney-client relationship through the training. It's just to get you along during a very weird time. So understand that. What we're going to cover today are what's going on with IRCA, how the I-9 process, how does that affect us when we're in a pandemic, and how Department of Homeland Security is going to handle the I-9 process moving forward through the pandemic. We have, of course, regular rules about how to complete the Form I-9 and examine documents, and that has been changed or updated for the time being to help during the pandemic. We'll talk about the policy that you should have in place during this time, how to handle the Form I-9 going forward, and new hires or using Section 3, and then how the pandemic is affecting audits with ICE and both and internal audits for employers, and then a little bit of guidance on what's happening with enforcement right now to not relax because you're in a pandemic, because you think ICE isn't enforcing, they are. So we'll just get started real quick to talk about the current rule and then the new rule during pandemic about what the major issue is with the I-9 and hiring during this time with the COVID-19. So the regular rule for the Form I-9, for those of you who have trained with us and those of you who haven't, we'll just go over this quickly. The rule for the Form I-9 is that Section 1 must be done on the first day of employment. That is when you've offered the job to the employee, when they've accepted the job, and when they've presented themselves for employment-related duties. This may not be the first day that they come into work to clock in, but it may be the day they come and fill out the new hire packet or the onboarding packet. That must be done on the first day of employment. Section 2 must be done within 3 business days. Section 2 is where the trained I-9 administrator for the company is reviewing the documents the employee provides to establish identity and employment authorization. In this case, it must be done within 3 business days, and it must be done in person. So the guidance from or requirement from ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, who is the enforcing body against I-9 violations against employers, has stated a physical review of documents is required so that the employer can verify whether the documents are genuine and whether the person has employment eligibility in the United States. E-Verify, which some employers may not be doing but probably should, that would be another training. We could discuss that, compliance officer training. What is E-Verify and how is it useful to you as a compliance tool? Also should be done within 3 business days. Again, that has not changed. It is a requirement, not going anywhere. So here's the form, kind of what it looks like as I was discussing it. Section 1 on the first day of employment. Section 2 must be done within 3 business days. That physical review of documents. That's the normal rule, not in a pandemic. The instructions of the form itself specifically state physically examining the documents is a requirement. The reason for that is if you're looking to detect whether a document is counterfeit, then you may run into some security features that you couldn't check virtually. And so, and also identity theft. The person in front of you is not the person they say they are. The idea is that a physical review of the documents, having the person with you would mitigate any potential ways for someone to lie and give you fake documents. So physical review is the regular rule. There's never been an exception for remote hires. Let's say your company has an office in Seattle and it's easier for you just to do a Skype review of the documents, no, it's not allowed. Usually the process has been to send that person to a bank or to a notary who would review the documents in the original and fill out the Form I-9 on behalf of the company. However, there is a temporary rule in place right now. It's allowing virtual review of documents. I think Department of Homeland Security finally figured out that employers may still want to hire during this time, or they may be required to re-verify work authorization. So they've established a temporary rule that is a practical approach to handling this process for employers. Of course, in our practice, we understand that compliance is huge. It's all we do. That's why we're in this training. And that the government is fining employers for major issues. So had they not released this rule, every employer hiring during this time would be in violation and probably subject to fines. And Leyla will talk a little bit more about the enforcement part of it. So what's the timing of this? There's an allowance for review of digital review of documents only for 60 days or 3 days after the end of the national emergency, whichever comes first. So this grant to review the documents electronically through Skype or Gmail or whatever, or Zoom, as we're on today, is only good as long as the government allows it to be. So 60 days from when it was issued, which was March 20, ending May 19th, or 3 days after the end of the national emergency. So be aware of these timelines so that if you do avail yourself of this rule, that you're not going beyond when it's okay. You will be fined for it. So it's not worth it to go beyond when it's allowed. There's two ways you can use this rule. Basically, I said if you're a company that is 100% remote, then you will be able to use this rule to review documents digitally. Or if your company is not 100% remote, you have some people in the office, then if your company is subject to lockdown protocols is what is in the guidance from ICE. What does that mean? You're subject to the shutdown of everyone but essential employees, and or the employee themselves are quarantined because they have coronavirus, have had contact with somebody who is, and so on. So there's two ways to be eligible for this rule: 100% remote lockdown or subject to lockdown protocol, whatever that means. As compliance attorneys, our job is to interpret the guidance and give back to what we think is the most practical, reasonable, but compliant approach. And we have decided that we don't know anybody who's not subject to the lockdown protocols in the US. Leyla, do you agree?
Yes, definitely.
Right. So at the end of the day, if you're not 100% remote, you probably are eligible to use this rule using number 2 here, being subject to lockdown protocol. And maybe, Leyla, would you be interested in showing us the procedure of if you decide, your company decides you're able to use this rule, what does that look like when you actually complete the I-9?
Right, correct. So there's different situations. Let's say that you are fortunate enough to be hiring right now, and you have this great employee that you want to hire, but you have to examine the documents. So ideally, you would conduct the same process that you would at the office, except you would do it over some sort of video. So you would do it through video Zoom or a video conference call or Skype. The employee would complete section 1 of the I-9. Then when you get to section 2, you would ask the employee to show you his or her documents. And so you would review those documents over video and then record that document information in section 2. We are also asking our clients at least to have the employee email or text a picture of the document so that you can keep a copy of that document with the I-9 record. We're also recommending that you sign and date that copy of the document to show a clear track of when you reviewed the document virtually. Then on the I-9 itself, you are going to be recording COVID-19 to make sure that it's clear that you examined that document virtually per the COVID-19 guidance. Then once the 60 days is up or within 3 days of the national emergency being over, we are asking you to, well, you're required to actually look at the documents in person, so do a physical review of the documents. Once you do that physical review, we are recommending that you also take another copy of the document. I know it sounds like over documentation, and we have a whole separate training on these this process, but we do want you to take another picture of the document and again sign and date that photocopy so that it's very clear if you were audited by the government when you examine the document virtually and when you examine the document physically in person.
Absolutely. So that is the process, and basically the process goes back to everything that is I-9 related, that ICE is looking for a log. Why did you touch the I-9? What did you do with it? Who did what? On what date? So very important that you're documenting. Thank you, Leyla. So that's the process. However, before we can get there, we need to talk about the policy. So a lot of employers will say, all right, let's get to work. I've got a lot of hiring to do. Let's do it per this training, but make sure you have a written policy in place first. So one of the things that we believe will happen is that if employers say, look, under COVID-19, you gave us this rule, you said we could do it. ICE is going to say, well, where's your policy? How do I know you were subject to lockdown protocols? So make sure you have this in place. As a company, Corporate Immigration Compliance Institute has worked with the Mdivani law firm to develop a policy that we're giving to anyone training on this. So if you're taking this training with us, whether through the recorded or live, you have eligibility to have access to our sample policy that you can put in place. Basically, the policy saying who you are, the employer, the validity period, how you qualify, as we discussed, either 100% remote or you are working under a shelter in place or lockdown protocol. And then what are your considerations? What are your procedures under this policy? Of course, the considerations are this is a pandemic. We're under a weird time and the government's allowing us to use these rules. We've listed all the rules there, and here's how we're going to do it, the procedure that's put in place. The procedure is exactly what Leyla just said, making sure that you do it electronically, but also then follow up physically within the required amount of time. If you're interested in getting this policy, you can contact Evan Robinson, who was at the top of the training at Corporate Immigration Compliance Institute, or Mira Mdivani. Here's her email address if you're interested. Okay, so that's the update from DHS. Department of Homeland Security has said, okay, we'll let you, for a little bit, we'll let you review documents virtually, but the 3-day timeline has not changed. Same for E-Verify. There's no extension of time to get documents from employees, even if those employees, let's say, can't access the DMV if they have a lost driver's license or a social security card if they don't know where their social security card is. So that's something to be very considerate of, that employees may not be able to go get those documents that you need, but the government is not given any leeway there. So at the top of the training, we said 3 business days to review documents, and 3 business days to do E-Verify. E-Verify has not given us any update except for that if you are missing the 3-day timeline, you may use the drop down called COVID-19, saying you can blame the pandemic if the 3-day deadline was missed. That being said, we don't encourage you to utilize this. We don't want employers to say, yeah, well, we can just say COVID-19 on E-Verify, don't worry about it. I don't think so. It's still the rule, and missing the deadline can be still a violation, triggering fines and so on. So that is the I-9 E-Verify part of it. One of the things we talk about in training when we train employers on compliance, full compliance for companies, is doing an internal I-9 audit annually, making sure that you've hired an outside auditor to look at your I-9s, make sure they're good, someone unbiased. And so I'm going to let Leyla first talk about that, the effect of COVID-19 on keeping these annual audits going regularly, and then we'll run into, let's say you get a subpoena from ICE. What's the effect of that? So Leyla, what do you think are some major issues you as an auditor have been seeing for internal audits, not including ICE?
Correct. So first, I just want to say that I think it's important not to get too comfortable during the COVID-19. The government very specifically said they were giving us specific guidance so that we are able to still comply with the I-9 requirements. As attorneys, we read that to say, hey, we still expect you to comply in full, right? We're giving you some additional guidance, and we're giving you a little bit of help so that you are able to comply. So by all means, this is not a pass to not be looking at I-9s and not be looking at documents. We have to still comply. We just have a little bit of help that we can do it virtually. Another thing I'll say about audits is that in 2008, we had a great economic recession, and 2009 happened to be the year where we saw the most ICE audits and the most activity in several years. So We are anticipating that probably towards the end of 2020 or maybe in 2021, we are going to see a lot of government audits. So very important for companies to, as soon as possible, do stay on track. If you conduct annual internal I-9 audits, try to stay close to that timeline. If you've never done an internal I-9 audit, this is a good time to start. When we talk about internal I-9 audits, what we mean is go to a third-party compliance specialist. And so I'm taking that language directly out of the Asplin case, which was one of the largest I-9 violations case. It was a $95 million I-9 violations case at the end of 2017. In that press release, the government specifically said employers need to be going to a third-party compliance specialist to review their I-9 process. So that's what I mean by the internal I-9 audit. That's ideal if you're doing an internal audit and you're not doing an audit pursuant to an ICE subpoena. But sometimes ICE does serve you a subpoena before you're able to audit your I-9s internally. So if you have been served with an ICE subpoena, this is a little bit on the screen, a little bit of the process. You would get a notice of inspection. This could be in person or it could be through certified mail. And the government does have to give you 3 business days to produce I-9s, which is not very much time at all. Usually if we enter our appearance, we will immediately ask for additional time. Now, this is one of the situations where the COVID-19 guidance has given employers an automatic extension. So while technically you only have 3 business days to produce an I-9 if you've been served with an ICE subpoena, if you have been served with a subpoena during the month of March of 2020, ICE has said that they are granting an automatic 60-day extension if you have not responded yet. So if you were served with an ICE subpoena and you did respond already, then it would probably be best to reach out to your corporate attorney and make sure that your attorney gets involved and actively seeks an extension from ICE. If you have not responded to an ICE subpoena, this is perfect timing to make sure that you get counsel right away and you go through an internal I-9 audit that will identify what errors are on your I-9s, and hopefully some of those can be corrected before you were to produce I-9s to ICE.
Yep, and I think the practical implications of coronavirus, both on the internal audit and producing to ICE, are that there's some face-to-face action that happens. So audit requires someone to review, if you keep original I-9s, review the I-9s, then issue audit sheets, and then the employer makes corrections on those. And section 1 may only be corrected by the worker. So how do we engage people, meeting people to do this? Doing it virtually is an option. You can do the audit virtually or digitally, and then have the workers maybe email them their I-9 or mail it to them, have them do a correction in section 1 and mail it back to you. You have to get creative with it. If during the audit it's found that you didn't review documents, there's no documents in the file, how do we handle that? I think we tag on to this policy here and say we can do it virtually, and then after COVID-19 is over, then go ahead and review them physically as well. So kind of integrate this policy into other aspects. Don't let the audit lapse. That, Leyla, I very much agree that if history repeats itself, that audits will increase. They are a good moneymaker for the government, for employers who haven't gotten into compliance or who've been audited and then chose not to continue doing regular audits internally, because to them, ICE, right, ICE has already come. We got a warning, therefore we're good. And that's not the real answer. The real answer is ICE will be back. So we recommend, especially if you've ever been audited before, do not skip this year just because you think it's an off year, especially in this time. So we'll kind of close out the discussion about this now, where the enforcement has spiked. Leyla talked about in 2009, it changed, everything changed. That's when the worksite enforcement memo came out about criminal prosecution being a priority of the worksite enforcement. And then in 2017, there was executive orders about this and promises by ICE to quadruple enforcement. We've seen it, it's there, it's real. the surge has been astronomical, and probably agree with Leyla that it will keep rising. And so employers, not to scare you, but just to remind you that compliance doesn't stop during this, unfortunately. Even though we know as HR, most of you on the reviewing the training here are much, much busier with a lot of other items, employment law related issues. Don't forget about the I-9s. We have an example of the subpoena here. It's a much older one. We grabbed a really old one, but basically this is to just let you know that ICE's subpoenas normally ask for original I-9s. We have found that they will take digital virtual production. And that's something Leyla's working on. And then something that's very important to understand, I'll let Leyla take this over, but I think it's a really good closeout reminder about how this whole compliance regime works, that not everyone agrees.
Yes, so sometimes we see, and the reason you see the punching slide is sometimes ICE best practices are not exactly what you see on the USCIS website. We get that question a lot from clients, and also during training webinars. They'll say, well, USCIS on the website doesn't say you have to have copies of documents. Well, we've never seen an ICE subpoena that did not request copies of documents. So we try to give you guidance based on what ICE recommends, and ICE does recommend that employers keep copies of documents because ICE is the one auditing employers. So USCIS is not the auditing agents. USCIS is the agency that puts out the instructions, puts out the Form I-9, but those are not the officers that are serving you with a subpoena. They're not the ones auditing your I-9s and recommending fines. So we do follow ICE best practices, and part of ICE best practices is for employers to keep copies of documents, and that means keep copies of all employee documents, not just a few. So when you go through your I-9s, when we do audits, we look to make sure that employers are keeping copies of all employees consistently. We also will recommend that you sign up for E-Verify. E-Verify is not mandated at the federal level. It is required by state law for certain states. So first of all, you should check with your state law, see if E-Verify is mandated by your state. If it is, then you've got to do E-Verify. If it's not mandated by state law in the state that you're in, we still highly recommend that you still sign up for E-Verify because it's a safe harbor. Meaning if you're audited by ICE, that provides a really good defense, and it helps us defend you if we can show that you signed up for E-Verify, you were using E-Verify consistently, and somehow someone still got missed. So basically somebody just got through that was an unauthorized worker, but it's easier for us to defend you and show that it was not your fault. Conflicts with state law, we put that in there just because some states will require E-Verify, some won't, and then there's always specific state regulations that make conflict. Like California has different laws in a lot of states, so we always recommend if you're in a different state to check with your attorney in that state.
Yep, that may have its own more restrictive I-9 rules or even less restrictive. So California, for instance, is, as you may know, fighting tooth and nail with the federal government on how to treat undocumented workers. And so sometimes being in compliance with the federal government means being out of compliance with your state. And so you've got to, as an employer, at least know what that looks like and what to expect. And that's actually it for us. Short and sweet. We want to make sure that everyone has all of the up-to-date details. We'll update this training as items come out. So I'm expecting maybe the coronavirus is not being corralled as quickly as we expected. So there may be an extension of this. We'll put out an update, kind of a tag along to this training anytime anything new happens. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much.